I want to start by saying that I am not someone who scares easily. I've driven alone at night more times than I can count. Long hauls, late departures, overnight stretches where you're the only set of headlights for 20 miles in either direction. I know what that kind of driving feels like, the particular quiet of it, the way your brain settles into a rhythm when there's nothing around you but road and dark. I've never been the kind of person who gets spooked by empty highways. I want you to understand that before I tell you what happened, because what I'm about to describe is not something I could have talked myself out of. It was real. Every detail of it was real, and I've had years now to turn it over and make sure I'm not misremembering something. This was about 6 years ago. I was driving from my apartment in Columbus to visit family in western Pennsylvania, about a 4-hour drive depending on traffic and weather. I'd made it a dozen times before, knew the route by instinct, could have driven it half asleep. I left later than I'd planned, around 9 at night, which meant I'd be arriving close to 1 in the morning. Not ideal, but not unusual for me. I packed a thermos of coffee, put on a playlist, and got on the highway. The first 2 hours were completely normal. Light traffic, good visibility, nothing worth mentioning. Somewhere around the 2-hour mark I noticed I was running lower on coffee than I'd anticipated and starting to feel the first edges of road fatigue, that subtle heaviness behind the eyes that you learn to recognize before it becomes a problem. I wasn't in danger of falling asleep. I just knew I should stop, stretch, refill if I could. I saw a rest area sign and took the exit. The place was small. A single building with 2 bathroom facilities, a couple of vending machines, a few concrete benches. Ambient lighting from overhead fixtures that buzzed slightly, the kind of light that makes everything look flat and slightly unreal at night. There were 3 other vehicles in the lot when I pulled in, a minivan parked near the building with its interior light on, a sedan parked toward the far end of the lot, and a pickup truck, dark-colored, parked close to the exit ramp on the opposite side from where I came in. I noted them the way you note anything in a space like that. Filed them and moved on. I used the bathroom, came out, bought a water from the vending machine, and stood outside for a few minutes just to let the cold air work on me. It was late October, sharp enough that you could feel it in your lungs when you breathed in. I stretched, drank half the water, checked my phone. 7 minutes, maybe 8. Then I got back in my car and pulled out of the rest area. I was back on the highway for maybe 4 or 5 minutes when I became aware of headlights behind me. Not unusual. There's always traffic. But something about these headlights registered differently, not in a way I could have articulated immediately, just a low-frequency wrongness that I noticed and then immediately tried to rationalize away. The headlights were close. Closer than felt comfortable for a highway where I was doing 70. I moved into the right lane to let whoever it was pass. They moved into the right lane too. I told myself it was nothing. An aggressive driver, a distracted driver, someone who happened to be changing lanes at the same moment. I sped up slightly. The headlights maintained distance. I slowed down. The headlights slowed. I changed lanes again. They changed lanes. I want to be careful here about how I describe my mental state in that moment, because I think it's important. I didn't panic. I didn't tell myself I was definitely being followed and leap to worst-case scenarios. What I did was start paying very close attention, cataloging the specific behavior, and trying to determine at what point the pattern became undeniable. People change lanes. People drive too close. People match your speed because they're on cruise control and you're both traveling at similar velocities. I was trying to account for all of it. I was trying to be reasonable. But then I remembered the pickup truck. Dark-colored. Parked near the exit ramp. On the side of the lot that faced the highway on-ramp. Positioned in a way that, now that I was thinking about it, would give a driver a clear view of every vehicle that pulled in or out of the rest area. And now I was 2 exits past that rest area with a vehicle behind me that had matched every lane change I'd made. I took the next exit. Not because I had a plan. Not because I knew what I was going to do. I took it because I needed information. If this vehicle followed me off the highway, the coincidence argument was gone. If they stayed on the highway, I'd feel foolish and relieved in equal measure and get back on at the next ramp. they followed me off the highway. The exit ramp fed into a 2-lane road with a gas station at the bottom, closed at that hour, and not much else. I pulled into the gas station lot and stopped. Sat there with the engine running and watched the road. The pickup truck, and I could see now that it was a truck, dark, older model, slowed at the bottom of the ramp. It didn't pull into the lot. It stopped just short of it, on the road itself, idling. No turn signal. No movement. Just sitting there with its headlights pointing at my car. We stayed like that for close to 2 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I had my phone in my hand, 911 already pulled up, thumb over the call button. I was breathing carefully and trying to think through my options. The gas station was closed. The road was empty. Going back to the highway meant driving past that truck, which meant getting within a few feet of whatever or whoever was in it. Then the truck turned around. Slow, deliberate, like there was no hurry. It executed a 3-point turn on the empty road, went back up the ramp, and was gone. I waited another 10 minutes before I got back on the highway. I took a different route the rest of the way, adding 45 minutes to my drive, and I didn't see the truck again. I've thought about what the truck was doing at that rest area. About the position it had been parked in. About the way it followed me through 2-lane changes before I exited, and then followed me off the highway and sat watching me from the road. What I keep returning to is the waiting. The patience of it. Whoever was in that truck wasn't acting impulsively. They were watching, following, and when I stopped and sat still and made it clear I wasn't going to do anything predictable, they left. That tells me they needed something I wasn't willing to give them, and the most likely thing I wasn't willing to give them was an opportunity. I don't stop at rest areas at night anymore. I know how that sounds, inconvenient, maybe excessive. I've had people tell me I probably just happened to exit at the same time as someone with road rage, or a drunk driver, or someone who made a wrong turn and was trying to figure out where they were. All of those explanations are possible. I can't disprove any of them. But the truck was parked facing the on-ramp. And it waited 2 minutes before turning around. And I have never been able to explain that. I need to preface this by saying that I have a very high tolerance for strange. I'm not someone who reads into things or invents meaning where there isn't any. I grew up in a family of skeptics, engineers, and scientists on both sides, and that disposition stuck. When something doesn't make sense to me, my instinct is to find the rational explanation, not to lean into the discomfort of not knowing. I say this not because I want you to think I'm uniquely credible, but because what happened on this drive is the first and only time in my life where I exhausted every rational explanation I had and still came up empty. My partner and I were driving back from a long weekend in Florida. We'd been visiting friends who were renting a house near the coast for a few weeks, and we had a genuinely good few days, relaxed, warm, the kind of break you spend the following week thinking about. The drive back was going to be long, closer to 14 hours, and we decided to do it in one stretch rather than stopping overnight somewhere. Split the driving, make good time, be home by evening. We were somewhere in South Carolina when we decided to get off the highway and find a place to eat a real meal. Not fast food, not gas station food, something that would sit well for the next 6 or 7 hours. The exit we took had signs promising a town with restaurants and shops, the kind of signs that are everywhere on the interstate and usually deliver something resembling what they advertise. The town was about 2 miles from the exit. I noticed something was off before we'd even reached the main street. It's genuinely difficult to describe in a way that doesn't sound melodramatic, so I'll just tell you what I observed and let you make of it what you will. The streets were too quiet. Not quiet the way small towns are quiet in the middle of the night, quiet the way a place gets when something has recently emptied it, when the absence is fresh rather than settled. The storefronts were open, or looked open. Signs were lit, window displays were arranged, a few cars were parked along the street. But there were no people. Not a single person on the sidewalk, no movement in the windows, nothing. My partner noticed it at the same time I did. We said it to each other simultaneously, "This is strange," and then we both went quiet, which I think was its own form of acknowledgement that we weren't sure how to process what we were seeing. We found a diner and went in. There were two other customers inside, both sitting alone, both eating without any apparent awareness of our entrance. The waitress who seated us was perfectly normal in every individual detail, friendly enough, professional, brought us menus and water without anything you could point to as off. But there was something about the interaction that felt scripted, or maybe rehearsed is the better word. Like I was watching someone perform normality rather than inhabit it. I've never been able to explain that feeling more precisely than that. It was a feeling, not an observation. But it was very strong. We ordered, ate, paid. My partner said they felt it too. Not something they could name, just an ambient wrongness, the kind that sits in your chest rather than your head. Back outside, the street was the same. Empty, lit, arranged like a place waiting for people to arrive. We got back in the car and I put the address of the next gas station into the GPS. As I was doing it, I noticed the time. We'd been off the highway for just over an hour. That was the first thing that didn't make sense to me. We'd been in that diner for 30, maybe 35 minutes at most. The drive from the highway was 2 miles, so 5 minutes each way. That left 15 to 20 minutes unaccounted for. We looked at each other. Neither of us had any explanation. I hadn't zoned out, hadn't lost track of time in the way you sometimes do on a long drive. My partner had been alert the whole time. We'd been in the car, then in the diner, then back in the car. Somewhere in that sequence, 20 minutes had disappeared. I filed it and started driving back toward the highway. We passed a Toyota with a shattered windshield, a big spiderweb crack across the entire driver's side, the kind that makes you wonder how anyone was seeing the road. My partner made a comment about it as it passed us going the other direction. About 10 minutes later, the same Toyota passed us again. I want to be precise about this. We had been driving in a straight line, toward the highway, at a normal speed. There was no exit between where we'd been and where we were, no side road that will allow a vehicle traveling in the opposite direction to loop around and reappear heading the same direction as us. And yet the same car, same crack, same damage pattern, distinct enough that neither of us had any doubt, passed us going toward the town we just left. My partner said nothing for a full minute. Then, very quietly, said they wanted to leave. I was already going 80. We got on the highway without speaking. We drove for about half an hour before either of us said anything. Then we spent the next 2 hours trying to come up with explanations. Exhaustion. Coincidence. 2 different cars with similar damage. A loop in the road we hadn't noticed. We went through all of it. We spent significant time on all of it. None of it held. The crack on that windshield wasn't a generic crack. It was a specific, sprawling, unmistakable pattern. And it appeared twice, moving in opposite directions, on a road that didn't permit the geometry we would have needed for coincidence. I've looked up the town since. I can find it on a map. I can find the exit. I cannot find any record online of the specific diner we ate in, though I've searched for it by every description I can remember. I don't know how to account for that. What I know is that we lost 20 minutes somewhere in a sequence of events that I can reconstruct with reasonable detail. And I know that a car we had seen once appeared again in a way that should not have been possible. I've done that drive 3 times since. I've taken a different exit every time. My partner hasn't asked me why. I think we both know. I've been driving long distances alone since I was in my early 20s. It's something I genuinely enjoy, the solitude of it, the particular kind of thinking that only happens when you've been on a highway for several hours with nothing to do but keep the wheel steady and let your mind work. I've done overnights, I've done 14-hour stretches, I've driven through weather that probably warranted pulling over. I'm comfortable on the road in a way that not everyone is, and that comfort is something I've come to understand as both an asset and, in certain situations, a liability. The liability part is relevant to what happened on this particular drive. I was heading south on a route I didn't know well, a long haul of about 12 hours from the Midwest to visit someone I hadn't seen in a long time. I'd started early and made reasonable time, but by the time I passed the 10-hour mark I was running on the last reasonable reserves of alertness and very much ready to be done. The GPS had been reliable the whole drive, but somewhere in the final stretch it put me off the interstate onto what I can only describe as a sequence of increasingly rural roads. Not wrong, necessarily, it said I'd save 12 minutes, but the kind of routing that happens when a navigation system is optimizing purely for distance and doesn't account for the fact that some roads at 11:30 at night feel like a different category of experience than the interstate. The road I was on was 2 lanes, no markings, flanked on both sides by dense tree line that swallowed all ambient light. My high beams were on and I was going faster than I probably should have been, because the road was empty and my brain wanted to be done and had reduced its tolerance for caution accordingly. This is the liability I mentioned. Comfort makes you fast, and fast means less time to react. I came around a long curve and my headlights hit the traffic drums before I had much time to process what I was seeing. There were 4 of them, placed across both lanes in a staggered pattern that would catch any vehicle regardless of which side of the road they were favoring. I braked hard enough that I felt the anti-lock system kick in, and I stopped with maybe 15 feet between my bumper and the first drum. My heart was going fast in the specific way it goes when your body has processed a threat faster than your brain has. I sat there for a moment, engine running, and tried to understand what I was looking at. Traffic drums. On a rural county road at 11:30 at night. No flares, no signage, no indication of construction or accident ahead. Just 4 orange cylinders arranged across the road. I got out. I know, in retrospect, that getting out of the car was the wrong decision. I know that the correct thing to do when you encounter an unexplained obstruction on an empty rural road at night is to stay in the locked vehicle, turn around, and call it in. I know this now in the way you know things after the fact, once the fear is settled into information. In the moment, I got out because my brain had categorized it as a road hazard first and a potential threat second, and I was still in the mode of trying to understand it rather than respond to it. I walked to the drums and looked behind them. Spike strips. A full set, laid across both lanes, positioned just behind the drums where your headlights wouldn't catch them until you were already committed to the space. The kind of spike strip that deflates all 4 tires simultaneously and leaves you going nowhere. I stood there looking at it for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, from the tree line on my left, I heard a sound. It was a voice. A single word, drawn out, in a tone that was calibrated to sound desperate, help. I did not move toward the trees. I want to be clear about that. Whatever else I did wrong that night, I did not walk toward the tree line. I stood still and listened, and what I heard in the silence after that word was the specific quality of silence that follows a performance, not the silence of an empty forest, but the silence of people waiting to see what you're going to do. I said, loudly enough to carry, I hear you. I'm calling for help now. And then I walked back to my car at the same pace I had walked out. Not running. Not showing anything. Just walking, the way you walk when you want every observer to believe you have more control of the situation than you actually do. I got in, locked the doors, and moved. The road had a grass shoulder wide enough for my vehicle. I drove onto it and navigated around the spike strips, scraping brush on the passenger side, keeping my speed low enough to maintain control. As I came around the drums, I put my headlights on full and accelerated. In my rearview mirror, I saw them. 3 figures, at the edge of the tree line on the left side of the road. Standing still, watching me go. Not running, not shouting, not doing anything. Just standing there, illuminated for a moment by my taillights, and then gone as I put distance between us. I drove 12 miles before I stopped, at a gas station at the edge of a small town that was mostly dark but at least had another human being behind the counter. I sat in the lot for a few minutes before I went in. My hands were shaking, which surprised me. I hadn't been aware of the adrenaline until I was somewhere that felt safe enough to let it out. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and reported what I'd found. The dispatcher took the information with a flatness that I've since interpreted 2 ways. Either this kind of report wasn't unusual, or she was simply doing her job without editorializing. I don't know which it was. I gave them the road name and approximate mile marker. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I never heard anything further. The thing that has stayed with me most is the staging of it. The drones were positioned to stop you without alarming you. They look like a road hazard, not a trap, so your first instinct is to stop and assess rather than reverse and flee. The spike strips behind them were invisible until you were already out of your car. The voice from the tree line was the final element, designed to draw you into the worst possible position if you were still in problem-solving mode rather than survival mode. Whoever set that up knew how people respond to things they don't immediately understand. They had thought through the sequence. They had set up something that relied on a specific kind of human instinct, the impulse to help, to understand, to not overreact, and they had built their whole plan around it. I think about the word help a lot. How it was spoken. The exact tone of it. The pause that followed it. I think about how close I came to walking toward it.